Hello, Jimmy. Welcome to the show. We
Thank
finally
you
made
very
it.
much. It's yeah, so good to be here. We've been working towards this for quite a while. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very curious to see where we will be landing in our conversation around
Yeah.
facilitation, because you have many years of expertise and walking the talk under your belt. And I'm excited to learn from you.
Oh
Um,
well, and vice versa. Very much, very much so.
so let's start at the beginning. When did you
Okay.
start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do, and I do it in a different context. I got started, interestingly, and it's kind of similar to your story, in Vietnam. But I got started facilitating, and I didn't know I was. And in the 60s. Now that tells you that I'm not young. Uh, the and I got started facilitating because I went through a training program, a 3 month training program to train us to go to India to live and work for 2 years. And the method that they used was Socratic. It was all questions. We
Mm.
read and then we sat and we talked and we answered. We just responded from our hearts and whatever we were thinking. And the key to it was, among other things, nobody judged us. We followed the question where it would lead, rather than having to come up with agreement, disagreement, fact, fiction, etc. It was our experience of the information shared with a group. It
Mm.
was magic and transformative. And I got into work just after that, training Peace Corps volunteers, an American volunteer program, to go to different places. And I used that methodology because I didn't have a background in education. I had a background in some training. I had taught dancing, so I knew about
Oh, wow.
instruction. But so I knew about that. So that I got started in that, and began working in workshops, training people to go overseas using the Socratic method, as well as planning and then all of your PowerPoints and those kinds of things, but also integrating questions as a way of engagement. I started to realize that I was a facilitator when I had thought of myself as a trainer until the late 80s.
Mm.
Um, and so I had jobs training different organizations and planning, organizing, and I had learned about instructional design early on. So I knew a little bit about that. But I went to an OD conference and I began to see that what I was doing was not just training, it was organization development. And the methods they used were facilitation.
Mm.
And they were very familiar because through the years I'd been incorporating, creating, and adapting various experiential kinds of things for the workshops. And then I realized in the late 80s that, oh, there's a name for this. They call this, first of all, it was organization development because I'd never thought of myself in OD, as it were. And then all of a sudden, here's this big world of ideas and thoughts and constructs and practices that were there. And I'm doing that. Is that amazing? And so that changed my identity. And the methods we used then were facilitative. So that's when I began to
Mm.
think about myself as a facilitator with the idea of making easy the kind of work that we do and the work for our clients. So that's how I got started.
Oh, thank you for sharing the story. And I think it's so beautiful when the moment we realize that what we are doing when what we've done is not alien, but there is an entire body
Oh,
and community who are doing the same.
yes.
And I think there's some beauty in almost developing your own methods as it seems, being ignorant of
Yes.
all the body of work.
Yes. Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah. It's really, I mean, that is an awakening when, as you say, when you realize all of a sudden, wow, the possibilities that come forward when you realize you're a part of something larger than you thought you were.
yeah, and I just wonder, I'm recently reading a lot about and contemplating a lot about the impact of AI and the impact of knowledge being so easily accessible.
Yes.
And So now it's first you acquire all the knowledge that is out there, and then eventually you're making it your own. And what I hear in your story is you first made it your own, and then you
Yes.
acquired knowledge to fill the gaps or to eventually stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, yes. And there are some really great giants. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and that brought me into, as you know, I have an interest in science and all of that kind of thing. And as I look at at that, how I got interested in that is that, a couple of the giants that informed me is Meg Wheatley and her book back 20 years ago called Leadership in the New Science.
Mm.
And it talks about the invisible forces that shape organizations. And it was quantum physics, and it was electromagnetic theory, and it was information theory, and she didn't even weave in contemplative practice. It was all hard sciences applied to organizations as how they change and grow. And
Mm.
that was another transformational thing. I have her book, and you look at a book, sometimes you get a book and you look at it, and there's so much there, and you've written, and that was another pivot to really realize that there are things that we were working in within the work we do in organizations or as groups or whatever that are informed by larger ideas.
And if I understand you correctly, it's the metaphor of hard science. So where are
Yes,
parallels in how humans or organizations behave and how,
yes,
let's say, molecules behave?
that's right.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that gets to the idea of it's nested. It's molecules and then atoms and then
Yeah.
and there are the themes within themes within themes, and you can go all the way to working in organizations and groups, but those patterns are consistent if you look for the patterns.
Yeah. And I would love to go into more detail with that. And before that, just also add another layer of perspective because you briefly mentioned, very briefly, that you came from a teaching dance
Yes,
background. And this I find fascinating because in dance you have the leader and you have the follower. And you
yes.
cannot force it. And it really depends on the combination of both dancers. So you do have a structure, but you have to hold it loosely. So I would be curious how this background has also informed your work.
I think, wow. Okay. Hmm.
You didn't see this one coming.
I didn't see that coming. I think that a couple of things. One, it taught me about we were doing ballroom dance. So the dancers had samba, rumba, swing, all of that kind of stuff. They have patterns that are there. There's a series of stages you go through. You learn the steps, and then you learn to integrate the steps, and then you learn to relax into the music and the steps. So there's a process that we get, and it's a somatic process. I didn't think about it like that before, but it's a somatic process. And part of it too is in that integration is the fluidity that when you're doing as you dance as well. I take it. Have you a dance background?
Not a background, but I used to be very passionate about swing dance.
I did too. Yeah, I belonged to a club. You ate, lived and breathed steps. You talked about the music, all of that got really engaged. And I think where it came out is that in that fluidity of adding your steps to your music, you begin to I became more facile at smoother movements personally, personally and physically. And also in my teaching, then I realized when I look back that when I'm teaching, I really am engaged. I'm moving, I'm matching my words to the rhythm of whatever feels right. And I hadn't really realized that that has informed how I show up and how I be present and teaching or
Mm.
facilitating or whatever. That's informed it.
Mm. Thank you. And if I and if I remember correctly, the somatic practice continues to be a big part of your work. But maybe let's take a step back because I'm fascinated
Sure.
about the um, how you relate or what you can learn from hard science like physics about facilitation. Um, and
Okay.
maybe you can walk us through that.
Yes, I will. So, and the hard sciences I'm talking about, there are two hard sciences I play around with, and there are many others, as you well know. I play around with the quantum physics, and it's quantum physics, not just physics. It's not Newtonian. It is a different kind of physics.
Mm,
And and then I also play around with ideas in interpersonal neurobiology, the work that Dan Siegel does around the mind and the brain and the interconnection of mind brain and all of that. So those are two passions of mine. There's so
mhm,
much, however, that's there. So let's look at, say, quantum physics. There are 4 or 5 principles that have been discovered in quantum physics that begin to look at and the assumption that about interconnection, and that when you get down to the very basics of molecules and atoms, et cetera, they're not things, they're relationships. That blew my mind. How can you get down so low and it's just relationships? What is that?
mhm,
So I thought, so I kept that in mind. I learned this from Meg Wheatley's kind of work and others since then. And then there's something that's called spooky action at a distance,
mhm.
which is kind of the fact that we're all connected, even when we're not together. So when atoms are separated or molecules are separated, no matter how far away they go, there's still an interconnection. And that's so counterintuitive and so mind-boggling and so woo-woo, except it's not. Um, that was one of the things. And then there's something called the observer effect, that by looking at something in these experiments, the observation of the thing changed the thing.
Schrödinger's cat.
So, wow. Okay, so what's that have to do with facilitation? As facilitators and as each other, we're observing.
Mm,
And people know we're observing. And so the very impact of our observing each other is impacting how the group unfolds, how the energies are exchanged, and what can happen. So having the idea that, you know, my very presence influences and has a ripple effect in the
mhm,
group energy, in what takes place, for me as a facilitator says, if your very presence is stimulating these ripples, and we know if we teach, we're facilitating, but our very presence
mhm,
impacts. And so that goes back to, wow, that happens in the group. That happens in quantum physics. That's interesting. Is there something else there that we can learn from that will inform how we facilitate?
mhm,
Maybe there are other kinds of things in science that are there that are very obscure sounding, but relate to the invisible forces that are impacting how we work in groups and teams and organizations. Just maybe. I mean, it's
mhm.
not for sure, but maybe, just maybe.
Yeah.
And so there's the observer effect, and then there's the spooky action at a distance. There's I guess there's a couple of other kinds of themes that are within quantum physics that when we step back and say, how might this inform what we do
Yeah.
as designers?
So I heard the the three, so that everything is a relationship. And I think
Yes,
that's the basics also of facilitative work. So when we're with
yes,
groups,
yes,
they're not just
yeah,
individuals, but there's happening something between them.
that's right.
Um,
Yes, there's something between, I mean, it builds, then it builds.
yeah. And our presence has an impact on that.
Absolutely. Not only
And
in what we say, but how we are, how we be.
yeah. And I think that's something that we often underestimate in our work, indeed.
We do,
Um,
yeah,
because so how much do we trust the group? How much do we trust ourselves in the process? How
yes,
do we show up?
yeah,
How do we judge or not?
uh,
Um,
yes.
and then and then the last one you mentioned is the spooky action at the distance. Would that, and I wonder what the analogy or the metaphor would be. Is this, for instance, if one person leaves a company, leaves a culture and goes to another culture, they're still impacting, so they are still bringing something to the new culture, or how do you translate that onto the
That's
facilitation?
I would translate that once we've been in together. Okay, Jung had a thing that says once we come together and
Mhm.
energy is exchanged, and chemicals are changed, we are changed forever. So our very being in groups and teams and getting work done and having emotional release and whatever we do together impacts us. And we take part of that with us when
Mm.
we go away. So it doesn't mean in real time, if I sneeze and you're across the world, then you sneeze. It's not that literal, but hypothetically, and it's not almost spiritually, but there's a connection that we're always impacting each other, and we are forever changed in the interactions that we have with each other.
Mm. Especially if we in the context of a workshop or a meeting, we can create these emotional memories where we're really
Yes,
invested.
yes, yes. And in those emotional memories as well, particularly if people have a chance to reflect on the value of or the impact of what the group did, it takes it to another level that I believe that continues, makes it even deeper, so that you do remember. You may not know, you may not remember what I said or you said, but you do remember, and this is old kind of, you do know how you felt
Mm.
and how you named it. That's another kind of thing. What meaning did you ascribe to that relationship that we had? And if I say it was bad, it creates bad. If I say it was good, then we're creating a forward momentum and sense of possibility. This is really, was that a good experience or a bad experience? It depends on what you say.
That's a very interesting nuance because I think it often slips through the radar what we make it mean and how misaligned all the different meaning makings of a workshop
Yes,
actually are.
yes. And that's why in some of the debriefs of, say, if you're doing group work where you do a lot of call and response and you're able to build on what comes up, and so that you can ask at the end of your debrief, so what does this mean?
Mm.
What
Yeah.
does it mean to you? What are the patterns that you've seen? How might you use this? So we can assist in the meaning making without giving them the meaning. Let the group create meaning. And that can become, you can talk about that as how would you characterize us as a group?
Mm.
Or what metaphor would you use to describe us? And so that's a piece of the building of the meaning making, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the beauty of the metaphor is that um it creates a shared image that is easier
Yes.
than to discuss the different perspectives.
Yes.
Are there voices around you?
Yeah, I'm in a cafe upstairs. Sorry about that.
Oh, no
I'll
problem.
listen to you and then I'll tell.
Uh, yeah, no worries. I just heard the voices, so but the editor will be able to hopefully cut that out. And now you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There we
Um,
go.
okay. So,
Okay.
Gordon, please cut that out. Um, Meaning making. Yes, the metaphors.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if we, as facilitators, to pay attention, and that's what I'm getting from this example of physics, paying attention to the forces that we cannot see and that we
Invisible
cannot put
forces.
our
Exactly.
finger on, that are not
Exactly.
that are not woo-woo and not spiritual. It's what
Hmm.
we cannot observe are the relationships between the people in the group. What we
Yep.
cannot observe is how the experience of this time they spend together will impact their actions afterwards. And what we cannot observe is our impact of our presence and energy beyond the words and the
Right.
structure on
That's right.
them.
That's right. What I think we can do, though, in that is we can get a sense of the warmth
Mm.
that has created that you can't put your finger on, but you have a felt sense when we drop down and we have a felt sense of negative staccato energy and smooth energy and warm energy in relationship, and we can get a sense of that without I agree. You don't know if they're going to use what you've talked about. You don't know whether they've changed or not, but you do have a sense that something is different.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you make this mean, these invisible forces and the impact we have? So how has this informed then your work? You mentioned that you read this book and then you had this light bulb moment. So how did it inform your work afterwards?
Yes, I think it does. I did, and I think this is what it first of all, it shakes up your sense of certainty about how you see the world. Because with those invisible forces, there's other things going on. So in order to be engaged, we need to step back a bit and say, what else might be going on? What else might be happening? Um, and I think what it got me to do is that after I did the Meg Wheatley books and got involved in all of that, you begin to look for uh, how does what she say play out. But I think it was shaking up sense of certainty about the way things are and saying, what if this isn't true? What if there's another way of looking at it? So how do you inform yourself and how you show up to sort of say, and that moves into this whole magic area of possibilities.
Mm.
If I am if I am so certain about how things are and what the truth is, then I collapse and we go into the wave function. So that's the other part of quantum physics is wave particle duality.
Mhm.
So when we think we know exactly what will happen, how it will turn out, how it impacted people, when we're so certain of that, we have a closed lens.
Mhm.
What if what you see? There are other kinds of things going on. What if? And I think when we move as facilitators to what if, we move into the realm of being able to help groups and ourselves see new possibilities about what's possible, the work that's getting done, see new possibilities and engage in those possibilities. So kind of it's like a mindset. It shifts the mindset. I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah. And it now reminds me of what you mentioned earlier about how the Socratic methods of questioning has also shaped your work, especially in the beginning. Um,
Yes.
and I think, yeah, the questions we ask a group really also determine for how long we can help them to be open-minded.
Yes. Yes.
Because the way
Exactly.
we ask our questions is has a huge impact and can be quite,
Absolutely.
air quotes, manipulative, um,
Absolutely.
or guiding. Yeah.
Or manipulative or guiding. Yes. Um, there's an interest in terms of the questions that we ask. Um, a group of us came up with a model when we were teaching the power of questions.
Mhm.
We do as facilitators, power of questions, direction, I came up with the idea that there are many directions that questions can take, but there are some that are related to the brain. And I
Mhm.
began to realize that when you ask a question, you're actually playing around with people's minds because
Mhm.
the question invites the response. The upward tone somatically invites, so what would you like to do? Invites a response. So there's a physiological kind of pulling that is
Mhm.
there. So, the idea that our questions are important. Now, one of the things that came up with is turned into an activity that is very powerful. And it came out of the power of questions and the idea that you can ask questions about how you feel. I mean, there are many ways. You can ask questions about your future. your past, your foundations, and your purpose. And in that, what emerged from that conversation was an activity that has turned into linking that with neuroscience and storytelling.
Mm-hmm. No more. I'm intrigued.
So I call this activity we created, or I created, we all developed, was called Walking Your Story. And it's very easy to do and very powerful in groups and teams to bond, connect, develop senses of appreciation, and sometimes transform your personal narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you work it is, I just did this online. You can do it online, by the way. And so the way you work it is you have people sitting in a circle. And in that circle, there are 5 prompts. In the center is present moment, then some sub prompts. How do you feel? You know, what are you aware of, etc. Future prompts, sub prompts. What's pulling you? Where will you be in 5 years? How might you, look back in appreciation? Past prompts. What's informed you? Turning points, etc. So, and then foundation, what do you always come back to? And sub prompts around that. What do you come back to? What's your temperament, etc.? Who are you really? And then purpose. What's your purpose in life? A friend of mine, acquaintance, Angela's area. Now, this is digressing just a bit, but talks about the idea in terms of purpose. Her work with shamanic cultures, particularly the Maoris in New Zealand. I know you've been down that way recently. The Maoris in New Zealand is the Maori shaman will ask, what is the dream you dreamed before you came?
Mm.
What is the dream you dreamed before you came?
And I assume it's before you came to this world.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Before you came to this world, I assume.
Yes.
It's the higher purpose of our being
Mhm.
alive.
Mhm.
Mm. I think you can sit
And
with this
so
question
in
for a lifetime.
mhm. And so at the purpose prompt, you're asking, what is the dream you dreamed, or what's your purpose in life, your mission, your passion, what pulls you forward, etc. So then the activity is individuals have 8 to 10 minutes, say 8 minutes, depends on the size of the group, etc. And you get in the middle. And so in the center is present moment, 5 feet ahead is future, 5 feet back is past, foundation, 5 feet, purpose. And you walk and you tell a story. You narrate a story for 8 minutes. And the goal is that you need to walk on each prompt at least once. And what happens is people will start, and you start wherever you want, and you have to do the 8 minutes. You can't say, I've run out of things to say at 6. You must do the 8 minutes. So you're sitting around the circle, and a person gets up and they say, I want to start with my past. And they will say, I grew up in this town. They'll do whatever. And the prompts help them, but they don't have to stay with that. But they know they still have to talk about future, present moment, foundation, etc. So as they're telling their story, they're becoming aware of another part of their story that needs to unfold, and they will walk to physically the next prompt.
Because they will connect the memory to this part of the space.
Yes.
And I assume from how you describe it that this is pure self-reflection at first. So they're telling the
Yes.
stories to themselves. Maybe they're taking some notes. And then
They are.
online, people would move around their own space.
Yes. Yes. On the online, yes. You try to get them to walk behind, but you can actually do it if you have the prompts and just focus your attention on the different ones as long as they're spaced.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the power of constellation work,
Yes.
where by
Yes.
moving in the space, you can actually access different memories.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then how do you debrief that?
So, first of all, yeah, everybody goes,
Oh,
no
what happened?
debrief in between. Everybody goes and does their walk. And then at the end, The debrief is around what was the experience. And they will talk about, felt good, I was so scared, I got over it, all of that. So at that level, you're just debriefing it at that level. So then what surprised you? And everybody's listening, and people, it's a harvesting. So this surprised me, this surprised me. You could do it in triads or dyads or something like that if you wanted, and then roll it up. But with a large group, I think it's very powerful to have everybody hear everybody else. So what was the experience? What surprised you? Then are there things that you said you wish you hadn't? Because if there are, we want to level set that and make that okay, so people are not going away. Oh, I said too much. I was too vulnerable, or whatever happens to be. That, as you know, can happen. What do you wish you had said that you didn't in that? And then it is to say, all right, now what does this mean about you? When you hear the story that you told that you didn't know you were going to tell because you don't have time to prepare for it, it's spontaneous. And and you can ask also, at what point in the storytelling did you get comfortable? That's an internal reflection thing. So you've debriefed at experience, surprises, wish you had said, didn't say. So now, how would you characterize yourself given the story that you just, so give us a kind of an appreciative characterization of who showed up there and have some reflection about that. I'm really, it would be something like that. I'm really surprised that I actually said that, and now I'm glad I am. Another kind of response can be, I've just seen a new way of thinking about myself, because I think I'm recrafting my narrative. And that's part of the point, is to help them recraft their narrative. And you can do this many times. I mean, and your narrative will change, but we'll have, the details of the narrative will change, but you're still linking past and present and future, etc. And so I've just had this 2 days ago online, where a couple of people, that actually doctors, in a growth class, said, I just I hadn't thought about myself that way before. And so what does this say about you, and what do you appreciate about you? So that's the personal debrief. Then there's another couple of levels.
And so what I understand is it could be something for a team to make sense of who they are, first individual, who they are, and then being able to connect to each other on a different level.
Yes, exactly. And that builds towards the idea of a group mind kind of thing.
In what sense?
Okay, the group mind is when you get to a point where people are communicated and connected appreciatively enough that you can begin to build on their wisdom. So they're all very bright people, generally. They've all had very different kinds of experiences. Now they've moved into a realm of appreciation. And now from appreciation, they can work together. If you were having task teams and things like that, they'll be able to work together at a different level of appreciation, because they understand the other person a little bit more deeply.
And where they're coming from and what informs their actions.
Exactly. So in that, when you begin to see where other people are coming from, my experience is that when you begin to appreciate where other people come from, you move your layer of criticism down a little bit. You open up your heart to a little bit more acceptance, maybe not all the time, but so you're setting the stage, creating the conditions for deeper connection.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. And now I understand how you bring in the somatic experiences with the science. I think that's what you mentioned with by moving, it connects different neurons, or it helps you to connect in different ways the ideas, or where does the neuroscience comes in?
Neuroscience comes in with top down, integration, lateral, integration, prefrontal, and occipital. And so it's, if you look at the work of Dan Siegel, and
Mhm.
he's come up with 9 domains of integration. This activity helps people integrate different parts of themselves. Rarely, for example, would any of us have sat and talked about our past and then in the same moment almost talked about our purpose in life and then about what our future would be. So you're so you're doing a kind of integrative function from a neurobiological perspective.
Mm.
And so that's one of the things too that I think informs people saying, "Oh, I'm making new connections about." I just heard myself say this. I don't really think that's true anymore. They just because I just said this in the future, that's not true about my past. So there are, there are new connections,
Mm.
I think.
And I can see how it might potentially then point out inconsistencies.
Absolutely.
Because if we walk from
Absolutely.
our past into our purpose or into our belief system and values, and we see, oh, there was actually misalignment, there's a lack of integrity, then this
Yes.
might inform the way how we see or want to shape our future.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And an example of that would be when someone in the past, many times this happens in the past, it's easy to get caught up, of course, in your story.
Hmm.
I'm an abused child, the alcoholic home, whatever the traumas might be, plus the positives and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, you've got 8 minutes, and you've spent 4 of those minutes in the past, and you realize you got to get out of the past to conform to getting to the other things. So you have to physically shift your relationship to that story in real time when you go from the past trauma and go to, well, my foundation is that what I learned from my past is I'm pretty resilient. I got through that stuff.
Yeah.
I was abused and I got past that. Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about myself that way.
Mm.
So that's building on your point. That happens. That happens.
Yeah. Beautiful. Um,
There's another level too, quickly, and that is when you have observed, this is the observer effect. Now, what is the power of the being observed on the observee? When
mm,
you are witnessed going through that process, you can play around with the quantum physics of it, but they're observing each other. When you go through an emotional somatic state of I'm nervous, God, I don't know what I'm going to say. I didn't know what I was going to say when I came out till all of a sudden at the end, you're saying, got through that. That's a physiological response. And everybody in the room goes through the same thing. So that physical response, the big physical sigh that everybody has at the end of the activity is a connector.
mm. Yeah, I can see that because it's a bonding experience and this
Mhm.
collective relief and the sign of courage. We were
Yes,
afraid and
very
did it
much so.
anyway. Yeah.
That's right. And you witnessed in that courage and the relationships
Mm.
change in the room.
Yeah. And I wonder actually whether this notion of being witnessed even has a deeper meaning for, yeah, for us humans. Being
Not
witnessed, being vulnerable. I mean, it is extremely scary for many.
very,
And it
very
has a
scary.
very healing power.
It does. It does. I think, yeah, very much a healing power. They and I'd like to think more, in fact, about the power of witness. There's a neurobiology to it, I'm sure, and sharing mirror neurons and all of that.
Mm.
I'd really love to play around with those ideas of what is the power, what's the impact of being witnessed on person's persona, feeling states, integration,
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
I guess I'd love to think about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You have the mirror neurons. So it also has an impact on the people who do witness. And then in very different ways, right? There are some who feel
Yes, yes.
touched, there are some who feel triggered.
Yes. Yes.
And there are all
Indeed. Yeah.
these um, self-talks coming up and
Yeah.
judgments. I think that
And judgments.
if we are in a, and then it becomes tricky for the facilitator, depending on the
It
context
can.
we're in. Is it a team
Yeah.
that came together for some business talk and outcomes and strategy? Or
Right.
is it more of a coaching, therapeutical, personal
Yeah.
growth
Personal growth.
context?
Right. Yes.
Then
Yeah.
we can attribute more time or less time or more debriefing to this
And
impact.
exactly. Yeah. Playing with the safety nets that need to be built in if something like that goes awry.
Yeah.
There's another level of debrief that bonds the group as well, and I think that is, so now that you've seen each other, what does this say about us as a group?
Mm.
So if you're if you're a working team with a task force or whatever it happens to be, or even in personal growth, but in a personal growth group, what does that say about us as a group?
Yeah.
People give meaning to it. Oh, you know what that means? It means we're pretty resilient, you know? My God, we have all the same story. And by the way, in those stories, the hero's journey always unfolds.
Mm.
So you can count on that. And that's one of those invisible forces too, is that arc of the hero's journey, which
Mm.
is the same arc as the forming, storming, norming, performing one that you use in group dynamics. And
Yeah.
the arcs are the same.
Yeah. And then it can be interesting to observe what role the team as such plays in everyone's story.
Yes, yes.
If it's
Yeah,
in,
and I think yeah, that's where that's a good point. I've used it where I've mostly used it. I have worked work settings, but they were not intact teams. It was just organizational. But that's a good question. Um, I think too, what you can do to guide that, facilitate that, is on your prompts. You can say, past, what, your past, your personal past, is past in the organization. What's your experience in the organization?
mm,
How'd you care in the past? So you can actually add team prompts or organizational prompts to have people speak about that aspect of it as well. So yes,
mm.
I haven't done that, but that sounds very cool.
And I can see a potential breakthrough if the team can go there when they then face the future. So, what are the different futures that every team member sees for themselves? Um,
Yes.
because I think that's
Yes.
often something that, let me just wait until it's a bit less noisy around you. Um, that's something that I think many teams ignore or avoid. It's the unspoken that maybe some are already thinking about 10 years ahead, 5 years ahead, leaving the company and the team. Some are preparing or they want to have a career within the team. Um, Maybe some are becoming parents and will drop out for a while. And how could these unspoken futures actually be addressed in a constructive way on the foundation of what is our past, what are our values and our purpose?
I love it. Uh, I think that you can. One thing that comes to mind that we're just creating now, because I've never taken it this way, but I think it's great, is for that collective, you could have people at the end of this activity, based on what they've learned, write a letter from their future self to their
Mm,
current self 5 years out
yeah,
and give them time. Have you played around with that kind of an activity?
I have, and it's actually quite amazing what comes out if we
Yeah,
imagine the present from the future.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
beautiful.
so you could have once they and so they you had this so you have them take their time, write a letter from their future self, and then have them read the letter to the group. Or better yet, I haven't done this, but I've just is exchange the letters
Yeah,
and have somebody read your letter. and you just listen to what you said from your future. So you get it at another level. You wrote it, you thought about it, you imagined it, and now you hear it. And
Oh, yes, I can see how powerful this is, and I can see what a strong container you need for that and a level of
yeah,
safety within the team.
yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, really good.
Because these letters can become very emotional and
Yes.
and then we're back at the being witnessed, hearing our own words, having our own letters read to us. That goes very deep very quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think yeah, I think that's then also the responsibility of the facilitators of, and this, yeah, that's actually an interesting topic, that the awareness of the facilitator to where we're actually sending the groups with our prompts.
Mm-hmm.
And have we created a container that is safe enough to go there? And will they be able to live with this new truth once the once the container of the workshop or the meeting is actually
This
gone,
one,
the Monday morning?
the Monday morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very important. And I'm thinking that in the debrief, when it gets very emotional and people feel that they're very, very vulnerable, it is up to us as facilitators to notice that and address it. And you can address it in a couple of ways. Um, and uh, and to make sure that come away that we can address it, that we address it by helping making sure that people come away having been seen and they're afraid they have been and they're nervous about it, and that it's okay,
Yeah.
and that uh and this is, of course, sometimes you trigger things that are not something you can take care of in the group at all. Um,
And I believe that this is our responsibility to be informed beforehand. And I had a few conversations about trauma-informed facilitation, and I think that's actually
mhm,
a part of
mhm,
it. That
mhm.
what kind of questions are we asking? What are the prompts, and how deep are we bringing a group? And how much do we actually need to know about the group in order to
Yeah,
know what
yeah.
activities are appropriate? How do you prepare for that, and how do you know?
I think you can know a little bit about it by intake questionnaires, or depending on what your group is. And um, I think your team has to talk about strategies, the just in case, that your team has to have coalesced, your teaching team has to coalesce around um, how you might handle that. I think also that you have a huddle, the teaching teams have a huddle as the workshops are unfolding to pick up any red flags, potential red flags. You see any emotion, that anxiety, anxiousness, emotion, body changes. So we just keep our eyes peeled just to observe. Um, and I think that, and even with that, we never know.
Mm, yeah. And I wonder, what came to my mind listening to you is the also giving the option to dial it up or down. So what if it was, and I'm thinking of the game I had the founders of Cozy Juicy Wheel on the show. So what if you can say, okay, this is the cozy way to go through this activity. If you want it a little bit more juicy, yeah, a different prompt.
Right,
And if you want to get real,
right.
real, then you can
Very
answer
nice.
those questions. And thereby we offer some sort of autonomy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that. And another way of offering autonomy, and I just didn't do this and regretted it about a year ago, but you give people an opportunity to opt out.
Yes.
So they have full choice. And if, as you describe the activity, it seems like it's going to be too much, okay. No judgment, no blame. It
Yeah.
just part unfolds. It just becomes, and you can participate in your heart and in your mind and through your eyes
Yes.
and give them that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something that I have learned over the years. I used to be very kind of strict. Everyone has to participate, and we cannot just observe because it
Yeah.
harms the group. But I think just by giving the option that it's okay not to participate, it actually
Yeah.
creates an additional layer of safety. Yeah.
Quick mistake I made not doing that. I'm facilitating 2 years ago. I'm facilitating online a group of facilitators in a organization development facilitation online kind of session. My assumptions, these folks are experienced with this kind of stuff, that they go with the flow, wrong. I did not give the option to opt in on what I would consider a very low risk, low heat activity. Now, I would consider that. And certainly for facilitators, wrong. And so as I introduced it anyway, I got a couple of people reacting and very uncomfortable. And then I said, "Oh, you can opt out," but that was too late.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I learned something there about assumptions.
Yeah. And there's so many learnings in there. One is, as you said, if we give the option to opt out too late, the brain is already in full fight, flight, freeze, panic mode.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they might not be able to actually accept that and to calm down again.
No, they weren't.
Yeah. And I think the notion of facilitator and what skill set mindset is attributed to that varies greatly already amongst freelance facilitators who do that as their major income source of income. But then when we look at internal facilitators, I think very often they haven't had the time to really develop the mindset
Yeah.
that is required for facilitation that we take for granted. But then I think
Yes.
if we look at corporate facilitation, it's all about the activities and the methods, and the vulnerability gets lost somewhere along the way.
It gets lost. I've thought for a long time that the internal facilitator's role is the hardest facilitation job you can have
Why would that be?
because of what you said.
Mm.
Because the culture doesn't support giving you the time, as you mentioned. And there are too many, there are a lot of conflicting things. If you're part of an organization and trying to help the organization and bring in objectivity where it's almost impossible. And then it's a difficult road. I have sympathy for folks who've taken on internal corporate facilitation jobs.
Yeah. And on the other hand, it can also be beautiful because they get to witness the outcomes of their work and can follow the teams on the Monday after, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very satisfying. Yeah. Very, yes.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I think it really depends on the culture, the corporate culture.
Yeah.
Because, yes.
My work has been a lot in law enforcement cultures and quasi-military cultures, and the human resource. I mean, the touchy-feely world too. I love it though. Yeah, those cultures all influence what people are capable of and can and in a sense get away with. But I really think, yeah, how satisfying it can be when you actually start a project, you've worked with the groups internally, you've worked with their tasks, their action plans, and you've seen what you've assisted. You've just helped. You've
Yeah.
just helped, but there's a great outcome, a great sense of satisfaction can be there.
Yeah. And now I'm curious, when you mentioned that you have worked in um, the more command and control or military
Mhm.
style
Mhm.
context,
Mhm.
do you think that does it make it easier or more difficult to actually address the touchy-feely? Because my first instinct would be, oh, these are tough, kind of very strict cultures that don't allow for revealing anything that is human. On the other hand, I can imagine that if a group of colleagues already has the label, oh, we are tough, right? By
Mhm.
our profession,
Mhm.
we already know that we are tough. Um,
That's
then it could also be easy. Then we don't need to prove ourselves or someone something.
that's right. Yeah, I think yeah, that's a good that's a great point because um it is it can be in our minds a challenge that and there's the toughness idea. There's also what you do in terms of the how you handle the workshop itself and how you create the safety
Mhm.
and what methods you use to create safety. So the idea of being vulnerable is vulnerability is not part of the vocabulary. It's getting to know people at a different level to do the work better. So
Mm.
so
Yes.
more effectively and more efficiently and getting it done. A couple of things that I've done with these law enforcement types and military, civilian military types is you introduce things slowly. Back in the day, you don't have to do this now, but back 15 years ago with those groups, if you were going to do something like
Mm.
meditation, oh no, you called it attention training.
Mm.
Everybody wants to have their attention trained. So you could introduce the tools and techniques, and that's where I got interested in the neuroscience of it because I could explain to the more command and control groups why this stuff is worth considering because there's a science to it, there's an art to doing it, and there's a craft to structuring it. And so
Mm.
you could use the science to inform people, to get people to sort of relax into, okay, I'll close my eyes and I'll be quiet just for a minute. I'll be quiet just for a minute. And so that's there. And then how you sequence things, how you create the safety, and then how you describe the activities
Mm.
is also there. Our language, as you well know, our language informs so much of what we create in the world. So you use a you don't use an organization development language or an applied psychology language in a military environment. For example, you don't give rise to the fact that they're going to want to do this. You use a language that's more consistent with the way in which they experience the world. It's not right or wrong, it's just different.
Yeah.
And then the activities that you create are ones that move you slowly to sharing your information and becoming more. And in some of the revealing activities that can get quite vulnerable, they have they can control how deep they go.
Mm.
So you give them the opportunity. So for example, and there's a story activity where you talk about yourself for 10 minutes without being interrupted.
Wow. That's long.
Anything you want to. Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
people struggle with 3 minutes.
That's right. That's right. And
Okay.
so and in that, so and this and I've done this a lot of these structured environments. It works, always works. In fact, I made a list of 15 things that always work,
Mm.
always, never fail things that no matter what you're facilitating, you pull this off. It's like plug and play. You have to tailor it. But anyway, that's a separate one. One of the things is on this point is that you have people talk about themselves for 10 minutes without being interrupted. And they're sitting in a circle, pods of whatever core learning teams, or even a large group if it's not too large. And in 10 minutes, they can't stop. They have to use all 10 minutes. Uh, if and they can't give their time away. And if they stop, if they stop at 6 minutes, we have 4 more minutes in silence. And you don't break the silence. And so And then people can talk about, they could talk about anything they want, and you give them some prompts, your road not taken, how you might, live your life over again, or, how your family's influenced you, just prompts. They can talk about within those, or they don't have to use any of them. So
Mm.
after what happens, interestingly enough, in the group dynamic is the first person that starts sets the tone. And if they go relatively deep in what they talk about, it sets the tone for other people revealing at a deeper level.
Mm.
And so that happens. And you see that. And then you see also in the dynamic of that, is as it's unfolding, if people run out of time, I've got, okay, 6 minutes. I can't say anymore. That's it. And you sit. About half a minute in, they will say, oh, okay, here we go. So the time constraint actually is a forcing function, I guess, is a way of and they're going to be safe. They're going to get through it. And so having that extra time to be quiet, there's something else bubbles up. And always that I've seen, what bubbles up after the time they've taken some time is deeper than what they talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never done it for 10 minutes. I've done it for shorter periods and I observed
Uh-huh.
the same. Um, and it's so funny, yeah, to observe when the entire group sits in silence just to wait. Then there are many who feel the urge to break the silence to continue the story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then they surrender.
They
They
surrender.
surrender and go
That's right.
deeper. Yeah.
And one of the things we debrief on somatically on that is, so as you're talking for 10 minutes and I'm listening,
Mhm.
and you say something interesting and I want to jump in. What did I do to withdraw, not jump in? So it's the somatic. So it's for the listener and how it felt, et cetera, and et cetera. How was it revealing? The other side is for the person who was listening to what was going on in your body as things unfolded. So you had an urge to say, "Oh my God, we're the same," but you couldn't do that.
Mm.
So what did you do with your body to hold yourself back and
Mm.
to regulate? And then once you did that, what was the trajectory of that when you finally said, okay, just listen? What happened when you went to just listen? What was the internal experience of that? So that's where you introduce the somatics into engineering firms or cops or police or whatever. When you do that activity, you can begin to drop in somatic awarenesses without calling them anything other than, so what happened in your body when you had to listen?
Mm. And what do you observe? What happens if someone feels the urge and then relaxes into it? What happens in the body and cognitively?
I'm not sure what happens cognitively, but I do know that they will shift their bodies. You can kind of watch, um, you can watch people's faces as the stories are unfolding, and begin to get an idea of you. It's only a guess as to where they might be on that, but you can see them once they've decided they can't say anything. They will shift their body. They will relax. Their shoulders are down. Their breath is deeper. They're uh, they're kind of more there. They've kind of settled into the energetics there.
Mm. And then I can imagine that there are basically two paths to that. There are those who feel engaged with the story because they can relate, and then they will relax but actively listen. And then there are those who cannot relate and they might disengage.
That's a good point. They might, I've not experienced that, but that's possible. That the disengagement, somehow, once somehow the energetic tone is set,
Mhm.
it's the field. You've created the energetic field, as it were. People have relaxed into it. They know what the instructions are, safety. They know what's expected of them. There's a time constraint. They're not going to die uh, throughout it. And once people have a collective sense of relief, it seems to wave throughout.
Yeah.
And that I haven't experienced, maybe I haven't noticed,
And
but I haven't experienced people not co-op, not getting into it somehow and not in a way leaning forward, even if the story is boring.
and it's interesting. I'm now wondering whether it's actually a protection mechanism. So if something in the story triggers us, um, and then instead of reacting, projecting, or being nervous, we zone out and disconnect because it's an uncomfortable
Hmm.
feeling. Yeah.
It, yeah, it could well be. What I found in that is that when you debrief it, in terms of how it was, and you give everybody a chance to be heard about what their experience of it was, that um, that 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 disconnection and withdrawing. I guess I've never experienced it where people have in that activity withdrawn because of the nature of the content or the emotion that was. I've never seen withdrawal. I have always, and this is why I have this what always works for me kind of thing, is um, I've always seen that people engage at some level if they're safe enough and they see, and even in mixed groups, when the boss is there and, and somebody who works for you is there, et cetera, when you do those kinds of workshops, even then,
Mm.
there is something leveling about the story itself and seeing somebody else be willing to reveal or not reveal, or, even if they're talking about how they love football and their enthusiasm about football for 10 minutes is there, somehow you connect with that. I mean, God love him. He loves football. I don't like football, but he does, whatever.
Yeah, it's yeah, the
So,
authenticity and the passion that we can
and
see.
the passion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true. And now maybe we don't have time for the 15, but maybe your top three things that always works.
Okay, and this is some of the takeaways too. You said to a couple of things people could take away from here
Mhm.
if they, So one thing is that always works in forming a group in the very beginning is in the introductions and the objectives and however you start is to say, all right, we want to talk about our methods, but before we talk about our methods, we want to hear from you. How many years have you worked in this job or in this organization? And you calculate that. And you get, there's 350 years of collective wisdom. That's what we call it. This is collective wisdom that in the workshop, we're going to build upon. So our
Mm,
tools and methods and approaches are going to be honoring the wisdom that you bring to the room.
I love that. Hmm. It creates in very easy ways, creates a collective consciousness in the non-woo-woo
Yes.
term. So we are conscious to be this group, and acknowledge the wisdom of everyone who contributes to it. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Number two.
And it's another thing that you can do in the very beginning is as a facilitator having a mindset, and this gets into quantum physics. Because part of the thing in quantum physics is that you're in that relationship arena, you're in the realm of all possibilities.
Hmm.
So what wants to emerge can, if anyway. So for a facilitator standing up in front of the room, what's your mindset? And the mindset can be, what's helpful is, I'm in the room of all possibilities. We don't know what is going to unfold here. I need to be open to the fact that what wants to emerge can, and I can help guide maybe or create conditions for, but I can't know in advance, so I need to chill. I need to
Mm,
be calm about that. And so
yeah.
this is about your personal presence in terms of that. That's
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. What we talked about before, also how our unconscious desires or agenda might impact the outcome. If you're
yeah,
not open to
exactly.
certain possibilities, we might
Right.
unconsciously actually manipulate, facilitate the group.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
Another one of the things that that helps is a little activity that, and this gets to, we talk about nested dolls and stuff. And I know you might want to mention that, but so this is an activity that is just to get people to talk about introduction to stress. We can engineers, cops, doesn't matter. Introduction to stress. So little mandala, and they answer the question: what soothes, grounds, motivates, and inspires you? And they have that on a wheel. Soothes, grounds, motivates, inspires. They put a couple of bullet points. This soothes me. Yoga, and a bottle of wine grounds me. To they put it down. Then you share it. And so, hi, I'm Miriam. This soothes me. Yoga, my cat. This grounds me. You know, books on the mind. This motivates me. This inspires. So have people go around this, and then you say, all right, now, what did you notice? And there'll be overlaps. And so you're introducing stress and stress management. There will be, but you're also connecting people. There will be overlaps. And so in those overlaps, you want and they'll say, oh my gosh, we all do the same thing to ground ourselves. That's interesting. That's a fact. That's interesting. But at a higher level, a little more meta level, they say, okay, what are the themes that came out?
Mm.
What surprised you? And so now you've connected people on something that's internal, that is not threatening. It's about information. This soothes me, this grounds me, this motivates me, inspires me. It gives you fodder for other kinds of things. At least they've gotten to know each other at a little
Mm.
bit different level. Then you can
Yeah.
move into, if you wanted to move into stress and stress management, you could say, okay, let's talk about all the kinds of things that soothe you, and you could go into the neuroscience of stress and fight, flight, and all of that. But that's an activity that always works as well. Soothes, grounds, motivates, inspires.
Yes. And I can imagine that it's very interesting to do with teams because it will also eventually inform them how about their preferences, how they work, what stresses them, and how they can better collaborate.
Yeah, exactly,
Mm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And another thing that comes to mind, I know, is to use a model of temperament to get everybody on the same page with regard to personality. And
Mm.
the metaphor for that is earth, air, fire, water, which is in Myers-Briggs terms SJ, NF, MP, and et cetera. Those four quadrants. They're archetypes that go back, till 3000, 350 BC or something like that.
Yeah. Fascinating. What what remains your facilitation challenge?
Um, one that's always a major one is time,
Mhm.
wanting to pack too much into the amount of time that we have, and then getting enthusiastic towards the end and not getting to everything. That is a challenge. That is my edge. And because I get excited about these things. And when you're in a facilitating mode where you're wrapping up, many times you channel, you're moving things, you're connecting ideas, you're working to close, and you can come up with things you didn't know you were going to come up with. That's a whole different arena of facilitation of channeling energy. That's my edge.
Mm.
And packing too much in and then not having enough time uh, with the energy in the room to really close it and land the plane, because so many opportunities are lost not to land the plane,
Yes,
not to
which is
integrate the
actually
learning.
and then we forget that this is actually the most important part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and especially when we're coming in as trainers, we are so excited about all the knowledge we bring. I'm guilty. And there's so
Obviously,
much knowledge that
I
they
am.
have, right? In their
Yeah.
350 years of corporate history, um, as one example. And then what are we crowding in with our knowledge and what are we crowding out with our knowledge? Where are we taking away options for them to share their own experience and their own knowledge? And where do we create opportunities with our content for them to join and build on it?
The dance. It's the
Yeah.
dance.
Yes.
No.
Yes. And I think that's another
It's
big challenge.
Kenny Rogers. Yeah, Kenny Rogers, Kenny Rogers, the musician, he had a song called The Gambler.
Mm.
And the song was You Got to Know When to Hold them and Know When to Fold them, which was about cards.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's the dance. That's it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it will be different with every group. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And after decades of facilitation, looking back, what is it that you would have wished you had known before?
I've thought about that. No regrets,
Mm.
none. I could go back and say, well, in that facilitation, I wish I had this and wish I had that. And I can only imagine if I did that I'm only making up what I thought happened anyway.
Yeah.
It's only a memory that's been constructed around some thing that happened that may or may not have happened the way you saw it.
Yeah.
But I think so. I thought about it in terms of are there things that I regret or the things that I would do over again. I would tell my younger self maybe to somehow be less driven and not try to cram too much into what you do, but to be less driven. And that drivenness gave me a heart attack. And in fact, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I'm not sure I could say be less driven.
The heart attack being the best thing that ever happened to you?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
The heart attack, you just said that the heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
What did it,
Yeah.
what did it
Well, I was in, did you?
create?
I was in therapy. So I was in reflective kind of generalized gestalt therapy anyway. And so I had a chance to really work with it. I realized through therapy, etc., I was breaking my own heart
Mm.
by the kind of works. So I think that slow down and be more, be less driven, etc., is good advice. And if I hadn't had the heart attack, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today, which I love.
Yeah.
Because I broke my own heart, but it opened my heart to see new possibilities about how to be.
Mm.
And that new possibilities, that there was an emotional life and domain and world that I was only tap dancing with and maybe avoiding. And that was there. Also, it opened me up to the emotional intelligence world and the neuroscience kinds of stuff. And the idea that so it was an opening to see more possibilities for myself somehow. So I look back on it as being it's moved me into taking somewhat better care of myself, not many ways to go. So I think the heart attack and the seeing new possibilities, realized metaphorically, I was breaking my own heart. Very powerful metaphor for me at that time, and that I could stop. And then discovering their tools and techniques and approaches and practices that you can use to work around heart chakra stuff and emotional intelligence and understanding yourself. And that for me as a teacher, then if that opens up for me, it opens up, we're all the same in so many different ways. And we're all dealing with a lot of the same kind of struggles. We're all a part of a common humanity. And that's what you get from some of these activities is a sense of common humanity. Oh, Sue's grounds motivates, inspires, earth, air, fire, water. Wow. It's telling your story, connections. And so I think that allowed me to do that.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you, Jimmie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What a beautiful conversation. Thank you for, yeah, sharing so many really practical advice as well. And not only staying in the, sometimes it's very easy to stay
The
in
method.
the abstract and the methods and the philosophies. And I really appreciated your hands-on
Oh,
experience and, yeah, sharing.
well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. As you know, I love what you do, and you're a gift. Your work is a gift, and you are a gift. And thank you for letting me be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you.